Yeah, Gemara is talking about the laws of Shemitah, and this Gemara does last for 39b, 39a, 39b, 40a, 40b, and then 41a, and that's where it stops. So we got like two full pages on about Shemitah, um, four sides. The Mishnah had talked about the problem of a Shemitah esrog, that if it's the sabbatical year, which in Israel is creates problems with regard to using, regard to buying sabbatical produce, it creates complications. How do you buy it? You can't, if you give the money to a person who's not careful about the laws of Shemitah. So our Mishnah gave an option of how would you buy the esrog if it's a Shemitah esrog, if it's from the sabbatical year. The Mishnah said, you know how to do it? Yeah, ask him for it for free. The Gemara says, what about if he doesn't want to give it for free? Gemara says, well, you could get him to include the amount of money in the lulav, the palm branch could be double the price, and then the esrog he'll give you for free. Now, the Gemara goes into the reason you can't give money to an Am Haaretz, that Shemitah money, and the Gemara brought a brisa. The brisa said the maximum amount of money you can give to an Am Haaretz for Shemitah produce is 3 meals. The amount it costs for 3 meals, similar to, like, because on a Friday you could, you would give him enough for 3 meals for Shabbos. So therefore, basically, you could always, that's the amount you could always give an Am Haaretz. Now, the Brisa also dealt with a case. What happens if you transgress this? If you did give an Am Haaretz money that has the holiness of Shemitah on the money, what do? And the Gemara gave an option. The Brisa gave an option that there is a way to rectify it. And what is that? That you have produce that's, let's say, sixth year produce. Let's say you have a container of cashews or dates or dried dates or something. So these are from the 6th year. They're not from right now. They're from the 6th year. So what do? You transfer the money. You say, these cashews are holy from the holiness of Shemitah, because I'm transferring the money that Yankala, who I bought the esrog from, I gave him $100. Here's $100 worth of cashews. That's going to be the holiness of Shemitah will go on the cashews and be transferred from that money. I mentioned to you yesterday that this is the simple understanding is that this is a transfer. There is also an understanding brought in Tosfos that some say a transfer doesn't work when it's talking about produce that someone else has, or money that someone else has in their possession. You don't have it in your possession. How do you transfer the holiness? So according to that way of learning, it's not really a transfer. It's more of a penalty. And the money that the cashews become holy with the holiness of Shemitah means a penalty that you'd have to treat them as if they are holy with the holiness of Shemitah. And the other understanding is, no, they are actually transferred and they have the holiness of Shemitah to them. Okay, so that is really where we began with this entire discussion about Shemitah. The Gemara on the second, on Amud Beis, on 39b, it continued this brisa, and it says, Bamed Dvarim Amurim. The brisa, this source that we're bringing from about the Shemitah, laws of Shemitah, it gives a qualification and says that you're allowed to uh, pay for produce up to 3 meals from an Am Haaretz, and that was okay, up and including 3 meals. But more than 3 meals, that's a problem. When does that apply? That applies if the produce that you bought was from Hefker, was abandoned, an abandoned field. It was ownerless, made ownerless. But if you're buying produce that was guarded on Shemitah, that is a problem. And then you only have up to a Chatzi Isser. Even a Chatzi Isser is Usser. Even a half of a coin amount would be Usser. You don't have 3 meals worth. You get up to a half a coin, Chatzi Isser, that would be Usser. And here also, I should mention that it's not as, what does that mean? Even a Chatzi Isser, even a half a coin is prohibited. You bought produce that was from a field that has a guard or has a fence around it, and they're not opening it on Shemitah to everyone. So it's a guarded field. And you bought produce, and you bought less than a Isar, less than a half a Isar, excuse me. You bought less than a half an Isar. What would be the law then? Can you benefit? Can you enjoy the number one, would you be allowed to do that? Would you be allowed to buy something that's less than a half a Isar? Could you buy that? He has a grape tomato. I don't know. So its value is less than the amount of an Isar, of a half an Isar, a half a coin. Grape tomato, what does it cost? 10 cents, 5 cents, So you bought one, 15 cents. So it's let's say it's less than the amount that a half an Isar value is. So the Brisa doesn't really talk about that case. It talks about a case that even if it's a half a Isar, it's prohibited to buy. But what about if it's less? So one way of understanding it is, well, if it's less than that, the rabbis didn't uphold their decree. And it's so insignificant, it's less than 15 cents or whatever, however much a Isar or a half a Isar's value is, so it's less than that, the rabbis didn't prohibit. That's one way of there is another way of understanding it that really is just an example and really means even a tiny amount is prohibited. And that would be based on the fact that it could be that it's a biblical prohibition to buy produce of Shemitah that was guarded. You have to understand that what we're dealing with here, see, we many of us might be familiar with a law. You're not allowed to do business with Shemitah fruit. But we're not dealing with a big business deal of Shemitah fruit here. We're dealing with an individual selling a small amount of, he has extra. So we're not really getting into the prohibition of the typical prohibition of business with Shemitah fruit. We're dealing with more of a the issue is more the demei shvius, that the money takes on the holiness of Shemitah, and that's a problem here because you're giving it to an Am Haaretz. That's really what the issue that we are dealing with. We're not really dealing with the issue of doing business with Shemitah fruit. So dealing with giving the holiness of Shemitah money to an Am Haaretz, that's a problem. So when you buy Shemitah fruit from an Am Haaretz, you're giving him money, and that money takes the Shemitah fruit's holiness transfers onto the money. The money becomes has a certain kedusha to it that it can't be used for certain things. And as Rashi learns, it also has a limitation of it has to be consumed. The money has to be used up. It has to be consumed by a certain date. So these are the the issues that our Gemara is dealing with. And the Gemara brought this brisa, and the conclusion of the brisa was that there's a qualification that this whole law about not buying produce from a am ha'aretz, from an ignoramus, or a simple person who not so careful about the laws of Shemitah, or possibly he's not careful. We don't know for sure, but we're concerned. We suspect that he's not careful with the laws of Shemitah. So that law applies when you're buying from mufkar, from something that at least the field is abandoned. But if you're buying from a shumer, then you can't even buy even a chatzi yisr, which might mean you can't buy anything, or it might mean you can buy a minute amount from him, because the rabbis didn't care that you're giving him a tiny, weren't concerned about a insubstantial amount of money that he's going to get and possibly not use with the holiness of Shemitah. It's a tiny amount. So that is the end of the brisa. I'm going to start now on 39b from the Mesiv Rav Sheshus. Rav Sheshus asked a contradiction. Line 3 on page 39b. 39b, line 3. Mesiv Rav Sheshus. Rav Sheshus asked a contradiction, which is going to contradict from another source to our brisa. What's the other source? The other source is a Mishnah in Shvius, in the laws of Shemitah, the sabbatical laws. And here we had all these items, and is David here? Yeah. David had mentioned to us some of the translations yesterday, which a lot of them I don't know if we're familiar with, but some of them, yes. The asparagus was one of them, and we had coriander, which is used as an herb.
Did you get the WhatsApp I sent you about the first one?
Yeah, it was a little hard to read. Just what was the main point? That it's used as an herb? Like what? Well, let's see. What did you send me? Let's see. Maybe I'll read it to everyone here. Where did it go? It was a WhatsApp, right? Yeah. Pagum is rue. I saw in Wikipedia regarding rue and Sephardic Jewish tradition. Oh, it's right. It possesses protective qualities against malevolent forces. That right, evil eye. So yeah, I mean, I guess we should ask Sephardic people if they're familiar with it. It's called ruta or ruta. Oh, Jeffrey, are you familiar with this?
If it's rue, R-U-E, it grows in North America, and there's songs about it. If you grew up at a certain time and you learned those songs, okay. These are.
I want to know if you ate it. I don't care about singing about it.
Yeah. They didn't say anything about that. But if the name is ruta, that sounds like it's Latin, and in English there's something called R-U-E. But all of these grow naturally. Nobody's growing these. These are things you can go out and find naturally growing, and they're all used just in small amounts for not only herbs but for tasting, for spices. Sorrel. I believe my grandmother used sorrel, and she makes chops. Okay, but these are things you could find growing. It's not like you don't find hadassim in a special place and buy them from somebody. So that's why Rav Sheshus is bringing it up.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, David brought this up to say that it has something to do with removing the evil eye, that it seemed to have some segula, some type of a special symbolic significance against these forces of evil eye and other types of the people use it as a segula. Okay, so
it says also it's used for medicinal purposes.
And medicinal purposes. Well, that we said yesterday. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so that's the brings from different Kabbalistic.
It also says it's significant in Sephardic Jewish culture. During Yom Kippur, Sephardic shuls often pass rue among congregants to revitalize them.
So it's like a bestamim.
Yeah, and then it says Beyond that, Hasidic Jews also recognize the protective qualities of rue. Hasidic Jews were taught that rue should be placed into amulets to protect them from epidemics and plague.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So that's some of these items that some of these types of produce that we're talking about here. So we're talking about Shemitah, and we're going to be talking about Shemitah for another few days, basically. So let's try to go through it. Shemitah is these are laws that we're going to be dealing with. At what stage does the Shemitah law kick in, and what is the esrog similar to in certain laws? It's similar to vegetables. Certain laws, the esrog is similar to trees. We're going to be talking about these type of things. So, Mesav Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes asks a contradiction, and we're in the third line. Umin hamufkar shalish sudais v'sulai. From the items that are abandoned, from an abandoned field, meaning that it's not guarded, you only allowed 3 meals worth, and not more than that. That any more than that would be prohibited. Is that true? Verminu, where we have a contradiction from a Mishnah. Hapegam. This is this rue or ruda. V'hayar buzin. And this other type of growth, v'ashetim, asparagus, v'chalag loigos, and some other type of growth. Kuzbar is this coriander, shebaharim of the mountains, v'karpas, and karpas, shebanaharis of the rivers, some type of river cress, v'agarger shel afor, and some type of a growth that's of afar of a place where that's used for grazing, and or some swampy area. All these type of things are pturim meiser. They are exempt from taking tithings. V'nikchen mikol adam b'shvias, and they're bought from any person on Shemitah lefi she'ein ki yotze behen nishmar, because these type of items are normally not guarded. They're normally just growths, and you would be allowed to buy them from anyone on Shemitah. They're not from a field that was meshumar. Now, that implies like there's no limit. Anything that's not guarded, there's no limit on how much you could buy from anyone. It doesn't say any limit of how much. So therefore, what Rav Sheshes is asking is, why are you limiting how much you could buy from a Ama Oretz if it's from a field that's mufker, that's hefker, that's abandoned, it's ownerless? That should give you the permit, a complete permit that should be absolute. It shouldn't be limited. It shouldn't be limited to 3 meals worth. And so this was his contradiction, because that Mishnah doesn't say any limit. It just says if it's that these items are from ownerless places, you could buy from anyone. So the Gemara answers, "Who ma'isiv la v'hu mafarik la." He asked the question, and Rav Sheshes himself gave an answer, and he said, "You know what? B'chdei mon shanu." That really the brisa means a certain amount, the amount of mon. It's the amount of sustenance. The mon means sustenance, just like, I guess, similar to the manna from heaven. So it's b'chdei mon shanu, the amount of sustenance, and what we're referring to is the amount of meal for the amount for 3 meals, and b'chdei mon shanu, and the amount of mezainis, of sustenance. That brisa means was taught with the amount of a sustenance. So therefore, it's not a contradiction. The brisa that we brought about the limitation of 3 su'udais, 3 meals. And the Mishnah is also really saying the same thing. And we don't see it in the words but it really is referring to the amount that is mon, that is 3 meals. My mashma mon lishna who. Where do you come up with this term that mon is a term used for sustenance? The Gemara says the lahem hamelech, that when it was talking in the book of Daniel, it talks about that he prepared for them sustenance. That the word man refers to sustenance. So that's the term, they man shanu. So the Gemara now goes back, interestingly enough, even though it has the words ihachi, which would sound like it's a continuation of this actual statement, but the really the Gemara is jumping back to the Mishnah. So now we have to use our brain a little and think about the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that if you buy a lulav from your friend on Shemitah, he should give you the esrog for free. And this way you don't have any problem of giving him money for the esrog. Shemitah, the money becomes holy, and you're giving it to a simple person who might not keep the laws properly. And that would be the reason why you can't do the esrog. You can't buy the esrog in a regular way. You have to do some type of shtick. You have to you ask him for free, and then the Gemara said, or you could double the price. You could add to the price of the lulav. Ultimately, you're somehow getting around this problem of giving him money for the esrog. The money will end up having the holiness of Shemitah. And the Gemara asks, well, why is that okay with the lulav? The lulav, you can sell Shemitah lulav. You just can't sell the esrog lulav. I'm sorry, you can't sell the Shemitah esrog, but you could sell a Shemitah lulav. So that's where the Gemara's question is. Ihachi lulav nami. So if so, the lulav also should be subject to the same laws of Shemitah. And if you can't pay for a esrog, you can't pay for a lulav either. And this is really what the Gemara is going to be dealing with now for a while, is does the lulav have the holiness of Shemitah? So the Gemara says the lulav also should be considered a Shemitah lulav. If the esrog is a Shemitah esrog, then the lulav is also a Shemitah. So the Gemara answers that a lulav is a barshishes hanichnas l'shviyas. The lulav is really a 6th year produce, and it's considered from the 6th year. The esrog, the Gemara understands to be the 7th year esrog, that you just harvested it. And the lulav was basically considered a 6th year. And the Gemara asks, why? Why isn't the 6th year why is the esrog also called the 6th year? The Gemara says, the esrog is a 6th year that entered into the 7th year, and meaning it was still on the tree. And the law is esrog basa lakita azlinan, and an esrog you go after I'm sorry. The Gemara's question. Let me say the question again. The Gemara's question is the hachi esrog nami bas shishas hanechneses l'shviyasi. That's part of the question. If so, the esrog is really a 6th year esrog that entered into the 7th year, just like the lulav is a barshishes that's nichnas l'shviyas. Who? Just like the lulav, you're going to say is the 6th year it happened to enter into the 7th year, but it majority grew on the tree in the 6th year. And so the same thing as the esrog, it grew on the 6th year in the majority, and it entered into the 7th year, should be called the 6th year esrog, and there's no problem. In other words, if you're going to tell me there's a problem with both. If there's no problem with the lulav, no problem with the esrog. So the Gemara answers now. This is where the answer begins. Esrog, basar, lakita, azlinan. Esrog goes after where it's harvested, when it's harvested. That if it's harvested in the 7th year, that's called the Shemitah esrog. If it's harvested in the 6th year, it's called the Shemitah. esrog. The word lakita really doesn't mean harvested. It really means gathered. But the practically speaking, it means when it's harvested. So the esrog has a different criteria than the lulav. When does the lulav? What does the lulav go by? The esrog, we just said, goes by when it's harvested, and you just harvested it in the Shemitah year. The lulav is going to have a different set of rules. The lulav is not going to be followed when it's lakita, when it's harvested, when it's gathered, harvested. So Gemara says, Bain Rabban Gamliel, Bain Rabbi Eliezer, but whether it's Rabban Gamliel and whether Rabbi Eliezer, whether either of them, that they do argue about regarding the laws of esrog, both of them agree. Le'inyan shviyas esrog basar chanatos lina. But these two rabbis, they both agree that an esrog goes after the time when it's chanata. When is chanata? Chanata is a term used to mean, at least according to most commentaries, it means when after the flower of the fruit falls off and the actual fruit starts emerging from the stem. So the flower falls off and the fruit starts getting a shape to it, getting a form, starts being seen. That is called the chanata stage. Chanata, again, it's after the flower falls off and when the fruit emerges. That's chanata. There's a Rambam that implies a little differently, but that's the understanding, at least according to the other commentaries, is that that's what the chanata is, that it's at an early stage of the emergence of the fruit stage. It's really the beginning stage of where the fruit starts. That's what the Gemara here is asking, that don't both big rabbis agree that regarding Shemitah, the esrog goes when it follows the time when it emerged from the tree, and that would be in the 6th year. So you're telling me that the esrog goes after lakita, and therefore you're telling me you have a problem with buying an esrog on Shemitah from a person who's not reliable, who you suspect is not careful about the laws of Shemitah, but you don't have a problem about the lulav, and the reason is because the esrog goes by when it's harvested, and the lulav goes by an earlier stage, and therefore the lulav is a 6-year lulav, and therefore you could pay for the lulav as much money as you want. But the esrog, you have a problem because the esrog is really a 7th-year esrog. And why is it a 7th year? Because it goes by the harvesting. That's not true. We have a proof that the esrog goes by the time when it was emerged from after the flower fell off, when the fruit first emerged from the stem, and that would be during the 6th year, and therefore the esrog should not be a problem to pay for with money, and the money will not be holy with regard to Shemitah holiness. It will not have that Shemitah holiness to it, and that's what the Gemara is asking. We have these two rabbis that they talk about the laws of Shemitah in an esrog, and that Shemitah laws regarding an esrog doesn't go by chanata. Maybe other laws go by chanata, other laws might go by lakita, might go by harvesting. But esrog goes by, regarding the Shemitah laws, it goes by chanata, when it emerges. If it goes by when it emerges, it was not right now. It didn't just emerge in the 7th year and you're using it 2 weeks later for Sukkot. It couldn't have just emerged within the last 2 weeks. It had to have emerged much earlier. Must be must be considered a 6th year esrog, and therefore there shouldn't be such a problem. So the Gemara says that nan, because we learned in a Mishnah, esrog shava la'ilan b'shloisha drachim. An esrog is equal to a tree in 3 ways. What does that mean? That the law of a tree, the fruits of a tree, go by chanata. Regular trees follow this concept of emergence of when the fruit starts emerging from the tree, the beginning stage of its growth, just started shaping, being there, and it's equal. Esrog is similar to trees in that sense. And then it's also the yerek b'derech echad. It's also similar to yerek, vegetables, in one sense. And the reason why it's similar to vegetables is because an esrog does rely on extra irrigation. In vegetables, I don't plant, so I don't know about this, but this is what the Gemara, the commentaries explain, and the understanding of the wording of the Gemara is that vegetables rely a lot on extra irrigation. Trees, fruit trees don't, and grain doesn't. That relies on rain, but esrog tree and vegetables, they rely on extra irrigation. Anyone have experience in that? Is that the way it is today in most places? Yes, Jeffrey.
We learned that already indirectly, because when we understood the word hidur,
right,
he told us it requires the extra
hydration. But right, but that doesn't that's right. And that means that all the lulav, the esrog, the hadassin, and aravas, they all need a lot of extra irrigation, but doesn't really say much about other trees versus grain and the other items. That's why I'm wondering if anyone has experience, but I guess not. Okay, so so basically, the esrog is in some way similar to a tree. Three ways it's similar to a tree, and in one way it's similar to vegetables. And what does this mean? It's shaval ilan b'shloisha drachim. With regard to three laws, it's similar to a tree. Regarding the law of arla, that you can't eat for the first 3 years. Well, a revai, regarding the law of revai, that you can't eat from it in the fourth year. Instead, you have to bring those fruits. You can eat from the fruits, excuse me, but you can't eat from it where you live. You have to bring it to Yerushalayim, and you eat it there, similar to Meiser Sheni. That's the same law as the fourth year fruits called Neta Revoy. So it's similar to the esrog. On the fourth year, you do have to bring the esrogim to Yerushalayim. And Lashvias, it's also similar to trees regarding the law of Shemitah, the holiness of Shemitah that goes by when it's similar to a tree. What are the laws of trees? That goes by Chanata, when the actual fruit emerges from the stem. And that's the same law for all trees, including an esrog. Esrog is similar to trees regarding the Shemitah law. This is going to be problematic on our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said that the esrog is called the 7th year esrog. And really, we're seeing here that it seems like it's a 6th year esrog, because the esrog obviously grew during the 6th year. You might have harvested it in the 7th year, but it obviously grew. Otherwise, it wouldn't be ready to be used. It must be a 6th year esrog. And so we just see that it's an esrog tree is similar to a regular tree regarding Shemitah, and that law applies, is effective regarding the Chanata, the time when it emerges from the stem, when it emerges as a fruit. In other words, it just starts its growth process. Now, how is it similar to yerek? It's similar to yerek in one sense. And now we turn to page 40. That it's similar to yerek. How is an esrog similar to vegetables? And again, we said it's similar to vegetables because there is some similarity there with regard to the watering, the irrigation. And what's the law of vegetables? That the meiser of vegetables goes by when they are harvested. Vegetables go by the harvest. So if let's say it's harvested in the 3rd year, let's say it grew in the 2nd year of Shemitah, and it's harvested in the 3rd year. So there's a special law the 3rd year and the 6th year of the Shemitah. You don't give a tithe to the poor. You give you don't bring it to Yerushalayim. You give it to the poor. The 3rd and 6th year, you give it to the poor. The 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th, it goes you take Meiser Sheni. So what is the law with regard to this esrog, or with regard to vegetables that are growing? They emerged in the second year and they were harvested in the third year. So the law is that by vegetables, it's b'shas l'kitasai isuroi, the top line, b'shas l'kitasai isuroi, that it's Meiser laws, which is Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni, and which also means Meiser Ani. And Rashi gives this example that if it emerged, it emerged as a fruit in the second year, in the but it was harvested in the third year. So what do? You have to take Meiser Rishon automatically. There's no question about the first tithe goes to the Levite, but the second tithe is a question now. Does it go to the poor? Do we call it a third year produce and give it to the poor, like the third and sixth year? Or does it get eaten in Yerushalayim like the first, second, fourth, and fifth years? So the answer is that it goes by when it's harvested. And it's considered like a vegetable in that sense, that it's goes by when it's harvested, and you would take its fruit. You would take its fruit you would give it to a poor person. Now, what about other trees that are harvested at the same time? Other trees that are harvested at the same time that you're harvesting this esrog tree. So you harvested your esrog tree on the third year, and it grew on the second year, but you harvested it in the third year. What do you got to do? You got to give the tithing to the poor person. But the other trees that you're harvesting at the same time that you're harvesting your esrog tree, what do you do with those fruits? Those you got to take to, those are considered the second year produce, because it goes by chanota for those trees. And those have to go to Yerushalayim to eat. So it ends up you're harvesting both at the same time, the esrog tree and the other trees. But there's going to be a difference with regard to the second tithing. Do you take that second tithing and give it to the poor, or do you take that second tithing and go with it to Jerusalem and eat it there and rejoice over Hashem? So that would be the difference between the esrog tree and the other trees, and that would be a way how the esrog tree is similar to the yerek, to vegetables, and that the vegetables are tithed based on the harvest. Yeah. Yes, David.
Yeah, there's an interesting note over here about it says esrog is distinguished from other fruits in the fact that it does not have a set season during which it blossoms, grows, and ripens, but it can blossom at any point during the year. And the second thing is, it says the esrog themselves continue to grow on the tree until they're picked. They do not fall on their own.
Right. Does he what does okay, that's true, that the esrog is different in those areas, but the is that explaining why it should be similar to a vegetable, or just mentioning that esrog does seem to have some different qualities to it? It gives us understanding that it might have different laws. Or is it saying this is why it's similar to a vegetable in some ways? Like, well, what is that note on? What is it?
Just the background of what is an esrog.
Oh, it's on the background. It's not on a certain line in the Gemara.
Right.
Yeah, so it seems like he's just throwing in some information about an esrog, that there's room to see differences between an esrog and some other items. Okay, because we've seen that before, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be different. It's just like interesting. It's interesting to note that an esrog does have differences. Yes, Jeffrey.
So that would mean that when it's first flowered and then become a fruit, if that's what you mean by chanata, that would mean that every branch might have a different timing. Every esrog on the tree or bush, whatever you want to call it, might have a different timing to it. So that's why it has to be according to when you take it off. In fact, that's what he's explaining. That if it could stay on the branch until you even when it's ripe already, then that means that that's why it goes like a vegetable. Then when you take it off, it determines what year it's from.
Right. What you're saying is that it would be impossible to be able to halachically deal with such a tree unless they make it easy and it goes by your harvesting. That's what you're trying to say, Jeff.
Yeah. Right.
Because if the rabbis wouldn't make it easier, or the Torah wouldn't make it easier, however, whether it's a biblical law or a rabbinic law, it would be almost impossible to deal with such a tree. The only problem with what you're saying is that this statement that we're bringing from this Mishnah in Bikurim, it doesn't only say that an esrog is similar to vegetables, and it goes by lakita harvesting, which is a nice interpretation that you want to say, but it also says that it's similar to trees in 3 ways, and one of them is regarding to Shemitah. So it does make it almost impossible to deal with, because there is something that it is similar to trees, and you do have to go by when it actually blossoms, blooms. I don't know the exact term, what you would say when the first growth after the flower falls off. Would that be a bloom? Or the bloom is the flower, maybe. So the growth would that be blossom, or blossom is also the flower? What would you use the word blossom for when it blossoms? That be the flower?
I think that's earlier, before, but when the petals fall off, you can see the fruit is emerging.
Okay, so there's no term for the actual fruit emerging.
I'm sure that horticulturalists have a term, but
we'll just call it the emergence of the fruit. Okay, so the emergence of the fruit, what you're trying to explain, Jeffrey, which is a nice thought, is that we need to make it easier for people to be able to calculate. What I'm telling you is that sounds good, but it doesn't work to explain our Gemara, because it also says in our Gemara that for Shvius, it is going to have the law of Chanata, the emergence of the fruit. So, and we're talking about an esrog tree, and the esrog tree will have different emergences of fruit at different times, because the tree, it grows all year long. So it's not a perfect explanation to explain the law here. If you get what I'm saying.
Yes. Okay. But you'll always have the problem, even if you say that this was a very early emergence of the fruit. So the next year you'll have the same problem. So then you'll have the problem the 8th year. It only means that you're delaying the problem.
Yeah, true. Right. Okay. You're saying like the Mishnah you could somehow fit and figure out how to explain the Mishnah. Okay, we'll deal with that soon. Okay. So in the meantime, we're bothered with this.
Here's another note. I want to know if this is what you said already. The esrog is different from other fruits in its halakhic status is like vegetables, in the sense that in regards to halakhas of Meiser and Shemitah, its status is determined by the date that it was picked from the tree. With regards to Meiser, if it was picked before the 15th of Shvat, during the 3rd year of Shemitah, one is obligated to separate poor man's Meiser from it, although the fruit ripened during the 2nd year. If it was picked prior to the 15th of Shvat during the 4th year, one is obligated to separate Meiser Sheni, although it was ripened during the 3rd year. The same is true with regards to the Shemitah year. Even if the fruit ripened during the 6th year, if it was picked during the 7th year, it's considered Shemitah produce. However, in that case, an additional stringency is imposed, and one gives Meiser on that produce as if it was 6-year produce.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It brings from Rambam and
yeah. It gets a little complicated with regard to the law of Tu B'Shvat. Does it go by Tu B'Shvat, or does it go by Rosh Hashanah? And this is what that note that you just read is talking about, that certain laws and certain rules follow the Tu B'Shvat rule, and certain rules follow the Rosh Hashanah rule. And it's a complicated to work it all out. But let's leave that in the meantime, and let's continue with this the Gemara that we're learning. The statement that we're dealing with is the fact that our Gemara wanted to say that Esra goes by Lakita, and if you go by the harvesting and the gathering, which practically means the harvesting. So if Esra goes by the harvesting, that was sort of a way of explaining our Mishnah that you could have a case where, a very common case, where the Esrog will be called Shemitah Esrog, and the Lulav is called the non-Shemitah Lulav, and then the Mishnah is understandable because the Mishnah talks about paying money for one item, but not paying money for the other item. And so we want to figure out how to do that, how that case would be. So you have the lulav being a non-Shemitah item and the esrog being a Shemitah item. The Gemara asked, but we have Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer that both say that regarding Shemitah, you're going to follow the law of Chanota, which means it goes by the emergence of the fruit, the esrog fruit. And that's what's going to tell us what year it's going to be called, if it's called a Shemitah year fruit or not. And if that's so, it's it would seemingly be the same as the lulav. Whatever the lulav is, the esrog is. And so that's what the Gemara is asking. And we have these two rabbis that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer both say this. That le'inyan Shemitah, Esra goes by Chanota, the emergence of the fruit. So the Gemara says, first of all, the Gemara says, Divri Rabbi Gamliel. These are the words of Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Esrig Shava le'ilon l'chol davar, and Rabbi Eliezer says that Esrig is equal to a tree regarding everything, which also means the same thing for our purposes. It means the same thing that when it comes to the Shemitah laws, it's going to go by Chanata. When it comes to the laws of Shemitah, he's going to say it applies to other laws as well. But our point is that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer are both going to agree. They're both going to agree regarding Shemitah of Esrog. When is it called a Shemitah Esrog? If it emerged during the 7th year, it's called a Shemitah Esrog. If it emerged as a fruit before the 7th year, it's called the 6th year Esrog. So what comes out is that Esrog goes by Chanota, just like other trees. So how does our Mishnah have a case where the Esrog is going to be different than the Lulav, which basically the simplest way of explaining that would be that the Esrog is going by Lakita, by the harvesting, and the other items are going to go by the lulav is going to go by the Chanota when it emerged when it emerged. Now the Gemara says, "Hu da Amar ki haytana." Our Mishnah must follow a certain Tana. He follows a different opinion. So even though we thought that sounds like the common view and everyone seems to agree with this, the Gemara says, no, there is actually another view. Who the Amar, our Mishnah, he says he follows another opinion. Who the Amar ki haytana, he says like this Tana. The Tanya, because it was taught in a Braisa or a Tosefta. Amar Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi says, Avtolmas Hayed Mishum Chamisha Zaganim. Avtolmas was a rabbi, and he testified in the name of 5 of the elders that Esrog Achar Lakita Lemaiser. That he said that the Esrog goes after the harvesting regarding the laws of Meiser, which does sound similar to the opinion of Rabban Gamliel that we saw. And then it says, but the rabbis, Rabbi Seinu Nimnu Be'usha, the rabbis were counted, meaning to have a majority vote, and va'amru, when they said that bein lemaiser, bein leshvius, it goes by the harvesting. So basically, there were, in other words, there's opinions of the rabbis in Usha, in the place where the Bezdin Sanhedrin was, that that they concluded that there was there was such a view, and it was actually the accepted view there among the rabbis that were in Usha at the time when they made this. They were nimnu. They counted, and they found to have the majority against this statement of Thomas, and they said bein l'maiser bein l'shvius, you follow Lakita, the harvesting. And if that's so, then our Mishnah will make sense. The Gemara before it says, okay, before it concludes, it says, let's first understand that Brycer, that Tosefta, that it doesn't seem to flow well. And the Tosefta starts off talking about Esrog going regarding the laws of Meiser, and then it jumps to the laws of Shemitah. What about the first opinion didn't mention the laws of Shemitah? Why is the second view in that Mishnah mentioning the laws of Shemitah? So the Gemara says, Shvius man dechar shmei, who remembered its name, who was talking about it, that we mentioned it afterwards. So the Gemara says, Chasurei mechzer v'hochi katani. The Tosefta is missing words, and it was written shorthand. And really it should have read as follows: like Esrog achar lakita lemaiser va'achar chanota l'shvius. That the first opinion of Thomas testified in the name of 5 elders that it goes by for Shemitah, it goes by chanota, it goes by the emergence of the fruit. The Esrog, the rabbis were and regarding Meiser, it goes by the harvesting. And the rabbis were counted in Usha, and they calculated that they had a majority, and they said they counted their number, and they realized that they said that Esrog is Basar Lakita Bain Meiser Bain Lashvias. So our Mishnah follows that opinion. That is the opinion of Rabbi Seinu in Usha, that it follows the time of harvesting regarding the laws of Shemitah. So now the Gemara says, so now we got to compare lulav to Esrog. Taima de lulav bar shishas hanichnas l'shviyasu. What you just said, the reason why the lulav doesn't have the holiness of Shemitah, you know why? Because the lulav goes by when it emerged, and it emerged in the 6th year, and it was harvested. It entered into the 7th year before it was harvested, but because it goes by when it emerged, it's going to be kosher for you to buy it. The payments are no problem, even to an Am Haaretz, because it's not called Kedushas Shvius. The money is not going to take on the holiness of Shemitah. So that's what it sounds like. The reason is because it's a 6th year lulav. The Gemara asks, Had the Shvius Kaddish? If it would be a 7th year, would it actually be holy? Does the lulav take on the holiness of Shemitah? Amai, why would that be? Eitzim bi'almahu, it's just wood. This is not a fruit. Why would it have Kedusha Shvius? Eitzim, ein bahen, mishum Kedusha Shvius. Wood, branches, trees do not have the holiness of Shemitah. The Tanya, because it was taught in a brisa. Ali kanim, vali gafanim, shegivan lechuba al pnei hasada. If you collected them to put them in a storage, since Uh, so, so sometimes they're used for animal food, and sometimes they're used for fire. So it really depends on what you're using them for. So now again, the brisa here that we just brought, it says ale kanim, leaves of these of reeds, and ale gefanim, leaves of the wine branch, wine of vines, shegibavan lechuba, that they were collected in order, swept together in order, or collected for the storage and on the field. So the thing is, liktan la'achila, if you gather them for animal food, for eating for animals, yesh behen mishum kedusha shvius, they actually have the holiness of Shemitah fruit on them because they're meant for eating. Liktam le'etzim, if you collected them for wood in order to use them for burning, ein b'hem mishum kedusha shvius, they don't have the holiness of Shemitah. So you see that wood or branches that are not going to be used for food don't have holiness of Shemitah. And the question would be, what about a lulav? A lulav seemingly is not meant for food, and if it emerged in the 7th year, the Mishnah implies it would have kedusha shvius. Even if it's harvested in the 8th year or something like, but it's not meant for eating. So why are we understanding the case of lulav to be a case where lulav should have kedusha shvius? It just happens to be it was harvested. It was emerged as a branch. It emerged in the 6th year, and that's why you don't have to worry about the holiness of Shemitah. So that's the Gemara's question, that seemingly you're not using it for food. Shani hasam de'ama kra lachem li'acha. So it says that wood that's used to be burned is different. The pasuk says regarding Shemitah that it's for you for eating. And it's lachem and liachla. It really says 2 words. It says lachem and it says liachla. And lachem sounds like for you for any of your needs. And liachla sounds for you specifically for eating. And so lachem dumya de liachla. So the Gemara says, why does it say both words which seem contradictory? The Gemara says because lachem is really meant to be similar to liachla for eating. Misha and also yubiyure shava, if it's going to be benefited from and consumed at the same time, like eating something, that you consume it and you benefit from it at the same time, that would be a proper usage of Shemitah fruit, like drinking, sicha, burning for a candle. All of these happen, the consumption or the destruction of the Shemitah item is at the same time as the benefit is, and the law would be that the pasuk says v'haisa Shabbos haaretz, the lachem liachla, the law of kedusha Shemitah will apply to you for things that get consumed at the same time, things that are consumed the same time that you're benefiting from it. So lachem and liachla, so it's for you to use in ways that are that it's going to be destroyed, that you're going to benefit from it, and it gets destroyed while you're benefiting. That excludes yatsu eitzim, that excludes wood, firewood, that are used for cooking or for fire. I guess mainly for cooking, because maybe firewood might be different actually. But if it's used yatsu eitzim, that excludes wood that's used to make a fire for cooking. That the real benefit of these of burning wood for cooking purposes is not when it starts burning, but it's after it's not usable as wood anymore. That's when it's really nice and hot, and that's when you benefit from it, when it's coals, when it becomes coals. However, the lulav is going to be kadosh with the holiness of of Shemitah. Why will it be Kadosh? Why will it be holy with the holiness of Shemitah? Because the lulav is getting ruined every time you use it. Because that's its consumption, is the fact that it's being banged up, being shaken. And so therefore, the lulav would actually have the holiness of Shemitah. What do you use the lulav for? The lulav officially really is used as a broom. And because it's used as a broom, when does a broom get ruined? Every time you use it, you're ruining it a little. You're banging it to sweep. So that sweeping, that's really what a lulav is used for. So seemingly, because it's meant to be a broom, you're using it for a lulav. It's meant to be a broom. So the law of a shemitah will apply to the lulav as well, because the lulav is an item that's similar to consumption. So that would be the understanding here, that the lulav would have the kedusha shvius, would have the holiness of shemitah, if it would be emerge during the 7th year. Okay, we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Oh, Scott.
Yeah, bye.